Joining me, everyone. Chuck Morse here. Alex Newman's my guest. He is a contributing columnist with the New American Magazine. He's the author of Crimes of the Educators, co-author with the late Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld. Many cutting-edge articles. He's a world traveler. He just got back from Europe. Alex, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Chuck. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, Alex, you've done a lot of work in the area of education, and you've come out with a new column with some pretty stark recommendations. I mean, it almost sounds like you're sort of ready to throw in the towel on public education. What's going on with that, and what can you tell us?
Yeah, well, Dr. Blumenfeld wrote a fantastic book called "Is Public Education Necessary?" And I think it's a question that we need to be asking ourselves again. Maybe not just if it's necessary, but whether it is compatible with a free society. And so what we've done at the New American Magazine, we've now produced an entire special report. It's actually being printed as we speak, and it should be hitting people's mailboxes and stands on February 4th. We take an in-depth look at the education system as it exists today in America. We expose what's going on in the classroom today, ranging from the sexualization and the confusion of children, indoctrinating them with this LGBT stuff from the time they're in kindergarten and even before, through to Common Core, the deliberate dumbing down that Dr. Blumenfeld made his life's passion was the reading issue. So we exposed how under Common Core they're still using this quackery under the guise of teaching reading that produces illiterates by the gazillions, right? It's just an industrial scale production of illiterates. And so we expose all that. We talk about how we got here, right? I mean, it was a long transformation from the best non-system for education in the world at that time. Americans were by far the best educated people in the world before we got a government education system, until, Horace Mann came along, and then we talk about John Dewey and how these socialists and humanists sought to hijack education to transform America, very successfully, by the way, using Rockefeller money and a lot of other tools. Then we talk about where this is all going, in the future. The United Nations has been very, very transparent about its agenda to globalize education. They now have what they call a World Core Curriculum, and the name, the similarity between the World Core Curriculum's name and the Common Core is more than coincidental. In fact, Bill Gates, the chief non-governmental financier of Common Core, signed an agreement with UNESCO, the UN's education agency, back in 2004 to globalize education and to come up with master syllabi and curricula for teachers all over the world so that they could really get education globalized. And that's now underway. In fact, during the Obama administration, they were out in the open about it. You had the education secretary telling UNESCO that, hey, you guys are my global partner in education reform. Education is a weapon that we're going to use to transform the world. We're going to turn the children into green global citizens. I mean, they just came out of the closet and said it. And so we show, where this is all going. You basically have institutionalized indoctrination spreading around the world. And then we conclude with, when we have some other articles, we have an article by Israel Wayne talking about the many benefits of homeschooling, how, it's good for the family, it's good for the children, it's good for the children to become adults, they'll be, more literate, they'll do far better on standardized tests, they'll have better job prospects, less likely to be involved in crime. We talk about kind of the Judeo-Christian foundations of education. Jews and Christians have always had an understanding about the purpose of education, right? I mean, the scriptures are very clear about it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, for example. So if you're building your education on something other than the fear of the Lord, it's not just a useless education, it's a counterproductive, counter education, you might almost say. And then we conclude with what I consider to be a rousing call for parents to get their children out of the public school system, for pastors and rabbis and priests and everybody to get involved. We actually we borrowed a phrase from Lieutenant Colonel E. Ray Moore, the founder of the Exodus Mandate. He talks about we need a Dunkirk operation to rescue our children here. They saved the British troops off the beach in Dunkirk by basically mobilizing the entire society. They got fishing boats and pleasure yachts, and everybody was over there to go rescue these boys from absolute annihilation by the National Socialist forces of Adolf Hitler. And so he uses this phrase, we need a new Dunkirk to rescue the kids. And every church ought to be turning into a schoolhouse. Every neighbor or every grandparent ought to be helping their children to get their children out, whether they need financial support or help with homeschooling, whatever the case may be, because it's an urgent situation. And we make the case, and I think it's a very solid case, that if we don't deal with this issue, freedom is going to be lost. Maybe it'll take another generation, maybe two, but we saw these kids marching around for gun control. We see how they're turning the kids against their parents, they're turning the kids against America, they're turning the kids against the Constitution, against free speech. And so if you project the lines out far enough, you can see that we're going to lose our freedom and we're going to lose our republic unless we deal with this. And so that's our conclusion is, parents, you got to get your kids out.
Well, I mean, you paint a very stark situation. It's a very sinister agenda that you accurately portray, and your solution is a fairly total one. It's almost like, Sodom and Gomorrah. It was too late to save it, and they couldn't find a single righteous person in it, even though Abraham argued with God to try to save those people. It was too far gone. It had become so bad and so utterly dismoored of basic moral compass that it threatened to infect the entire world. And so it had to be destroyed, unfortunately. And I think that that seems to be what you're saying about public education. And I would point out to listeners, to viewers of this program who might be liberal, this isn't even an issue of liberal or conservative. The fact is that your education has been co-opted and is being controlled by forces other than you. If you want to have a liberal education, fine. If your community supports that and you vote for school board members who want that, then that's your right. But the problem is that whether you're liberal or conservative, it has been taken over by national and, as you point out, Alex, international forces that are unelected, unaccountable, secretive, and that are implementing an agenda that, whether you like it or not, it's something that you can't control. And you have a right to control the education of your children. That's why we have elections. That's why we have local school boards. We elect school boards because usually these are people that live in our community that we can talk to, and that they have sons and daughters in the school. They have invested in it. They've got skin in the game. And so we give them a good deal of say over the curricula and over how things are conducted, because they're going to be accountable to it even in their own lives. That is going away. People are now either unconsciously or otherwise implementing this increasingly national, if not international, agenda that, as you say, Alex, it was started back in the early part of the 20th century. John Dewey is sort of the father of this so-called progressive education. Sam Blumenfeld, as you say, spent his life documenting this and showing how Dewey wanted to take away the young person's ability to think cognitively and develop his or her own identity in the world and place in the world, and replace that with a behaviorist, collectivist idea, what Dewey actually called fusion. And I honestly don't think that anyone wants that for their own children, even if you believe in that. I mean, and I think if you look inside, you'll probably not. You don't want that for your own children. You want your child to be able to think cognitively, to be able to realize their own life, whatever they end up doing, whether they become, a CEO of a corporation or whether they become a beach bum, like Sam used to say. That's their business. I mean, you want to give them the skills and the functional ability to make their own decisions about how they're going to conduct their own life, not have this dissonance. And Sam does point out that quack methodologies were introduced consciously and deliberately into the school system, starting with look-say reading, in which case the function of reading English, which is a phonetic language, and you develop a reflex by which you can combine vowels and consonants and make out words and eventually sentences, that was replaced by memorizing words as if they're pictures. It's sort of the way Chinese is taught. Now that's okay for Chinese because that's their language. But English is not a hieroglyphic style language. It's a phonetic language. So to try to replace the ability to actually read the word with trying to memorize the word as if it's a picture, that has led, and Sam and several people at Harvard, by the way, And establishment people have agreed and have written about this, that it has led to dissonance in the ability to read. I mean, it's a dumbed down ability to read, and it's led to various social maladies such as ADD and dyslexia and other things that slow down and retard a young person's ability to think properly. And that's exactly what they plan to do, and that's what they have done. John Taylor Gatto also is a good author who wrote a whole book on this topic. He was the best teacher of the year in New York State back in the 60s, and he wrote how he saw, under his own tutelage, the transformation of New York's education system into one that had been based on cognitive learning to one based on behaviorism. Now the situation, as you point out, has taken an international turn with UNESCO, which is set up by Julian Huxley after World War II to be the World School Board, to try to internationalize and implement a system that is anti-intellectual. Let's just put it that way. It goes against the ability of the individual to think properly. The only other thing I'd say is that Sam pointed out this unholy alliance between what we euphemistically would call the right, although I dispute that terminology, and the left. Back in the early part of the 20th century, when you had the so-called right, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the big industrialists, they wanted to have a workforce that would punch a clock and not think too much. Kind of what they called human resources rather than human beings. People who wouldn't rock the boat, as they had these enormous factories where they would have 5,000 employees come in every day. And people on the left, like John Dewey and the so-called frontier thinkers, they believed in one world ant colony. They didn't believe in sovereign nationhood. They were utopians. They were, messianic. They wanted to change human nature into this one total world where we would all become de facto equal and there would be no more separations of peoples. So you had a coming together of these two forces to create education and to mold people in a way that would suit their respective agendas. So that's what we're looking at today. And that's what you've written about, Alex, in your brilliant book, along with Sam, which is Crimes of the Educators, which I urge people to get. And, it exposes the whole history of this rotten agenda. And here we are today, talking about bringing our kids out of the schools. And I think what you're saying also about homeschooling, everyone knows that this is true. The homeschooled students are superior in their education. When they eventually do go to college, they go fully armed. Those are going to be the future leaders. And they even include a lot of liberals who are fed up with this system. It's not just conservatives. So talk a little bit more, if you will. I don't mean to ramble here, about this idea of homeschooling. And Sam was one of the pioneers of that in the modern movement as well, I'd point out.
Yeah, he really was. I've often heard him called one of the founding fathers of the homeschool movement in America. And it's true, homeschool students, if you look at the data, we cite the National Home Education Research Institute. They have a great website where they collect all of this data about home education. And what you see is that homeschool students do far, far better on every metric you can think of. And I'm so glad you mentioned something, Chuck. You pointed out that even liberals ought to be concerned about this. You're right, this is not a political issue at all. And I don't know a single liberal parent who sends their kids to a public school and says, well, I don't mind if they don't know how to read or write or count. As long as they're indoctrinated into my ideology, everything's fine. There's no parent in the world who thinks that way. That's just crazy. Every parent, regardless of their political views, wants their children to be able to have the tools for educating themselves, for being able to think critically. And unfortunately, they're not getting that in the public school system today. And the data shows this perfectly clearly. You can use the government's own data, and you can show that the system is beyond repair. You have now, according to the government's own data, 13% of Americans, only adults, are proficient in reading. When you look at the kids, you have situations where like 1/4 of children, depending on what grade you're looking at, are proficient in reading or math. You have entire schools that don't produce one single child that is proficient in reading or math. You have places like Washington, D.C., where, according to the government's own data, more than 2/3 of the adult population are functionally illiterate. I mean, they couldn't read the back of a bag of chips if their life depended on it, much less their high school diploma. You wonder how they got their high school diploma when they can't read. So we are in an absolute crisis. And you don't have to take my word for it. Even back in the 1980s, when the situation wasn't nearly as bad as it is today, President Reagan put together the National Commission on Excellence in Education. They said this crisis threatens our future, our survival as a nation and as a people. They said if a foreign power had imposed this education fiasco on us, we might have viewed it as an act of war. And that was in the 80s. When,
that was before Common Core.
That's right. People were, back then, compared to today, were getting a great education. So, people need to realize that, the adults, well, I went to school in the 70s and the 80s, it wasn't that bad. Okay, maybe it wasn't, but this is a whole different animal that we're dealing with now. The schools are not teaching the children to read. They're not teaching the children how to do math properly. They're not teaching them how to think. They're not teaching them even rudimentary logic. They're instead brainwashing them to believe in certain pseudoscientific doctrines like the man-made global warming hypothesis. That science declares that we have to pay a tax to the United Nations for the gas that we exhale. I mean, it sounds ludicrous to an adult who had a proper education, but this is what they're teaching the children in the schools today. They're teaching 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds in kindergarten that they can choose their gender from an infinite number of genders, and that they might have been born in the wrong body, and if they just mutilate their genitals, then their gender identity will correspond with their physical body. It's just absolutely ludicrous. And when you tell people this, they can't possibly.
No, it's torture and it's child abuse, and they're actually giving children drugs to retard their growth or to try to change them. I mean, this is like the kind of physical experiments that the National Socialists certainly did in concentration camps, and it goes to Wilhelm Wundt, the functional psychiatrist of the early 20th century, who developed psychiatric labs where they began experimenting literally on people to try to change their nature physically. It's something that even 3 or 4 years ago would have been unthinkable. It would have been seen as utterly insane, but yet now it's being normed and it's being mainstreamed, and I predict that it's coming down the pike. I mean, this is my prediction, and it's only an opinion, but maybe 2 or 3 years from now, maybe 5 years from now, we're going to see the normalization of pedophilia too. That's coming. Yeah, that's happening next. So, look, whatever you may think politically or philosophically, the point is that the education system is set up now in such a way that it is infantilizing and dumbing down your children and their ability to think. And by doing so, by scrambling their brains with such quack methodologies as look-say reading, which they change the name every so often. Now they call it whole language. They keep shifting. And things like the new math, and we could go into other things which they're no longer teaching arithmetic, the ability to develop an abstract reflex to understand how numbers work and how they combine to create math. Instead, it's kind of almost a look-say addition to math. And other modalities, you're having the result being a child who becomes a product, a child who becomes a psychiatric case, and they treat them as such, and then they're susceptible to this kind of soapbox behaviorist education, regardless of what you think about the content. You don't want that for your child. We're not meant for that. People are meant to be able to develop their own intellect, to develop their thinking. That's what education is and is supposed to be. Not a chance for the state to come in and condition young people. I mean, this isn't new. It goes back to the Prussians of the late 19th century, and it's being implemented. It runs against everything that we think the United States is supposed to be about. Now, what you're talking about is you're getting into some specifics about what's going on in education and the introduction of sexuality at a very young age. I don't care what a person eventually is. Well, I do care, but for the sake of argument, what they eventually become in terms of their sexual identity. But the point is that regardless of that, children should be protected from all of it. We should be, in a moral society, traditionally, we protect the innocence of children. We don't expose them to sexual matters. They're not old enough to understand what it's about. You wait until at least they go through adolescence to begin to introduce it. And when you do it as a parent. You don't have it being done, in the schoolyard. I heard, or in the classroom, I heard a presentation by someone from Planned Parenthood who was introducing sex education into a school. And it was really the most disgusting argument I've ever heard. This woman was bizarre anyway. She had all these facial tics, and she was, just a demented person, with due respect. But she also said, listen, sex is everywhere. It's on the billboards, it's in the television, it's here, it's there, it's on the radio, it's all over the place. When your child leaves the house, they see sexual images, they see sex everywhere, which is true. But her argument was, well, therefore, why not put it in schools? I mean, can you imagine that? At least you'd think that there'd be, given the fact that she actually is right, even though she's celebrating this, you'd think that there might be a sanctuary, I should say, where a child can be not, free of this and maybe be exposed to some actual learning and maybe even be exposed to understanding the Constitution and how it works and, the history of this country, what made us who we are. Nothing like that. Instead, they're getting sex education, as you say, in nursery school. And
this is going worldwide, Chuck. One of the things we talk about is a new report that the UNESCO put out just last year, actually, in early 2018. They call it Global Sexuality Education Standards, or Comprehensive Sexuality Education Standards. And they fully intend for this to be implemented around the world. And at age 5, at the start of formal schooling, they began introducing homosexuality. They began introducing sexual pleasure, sexual stimulation. Things that a 5-year-old would have absolutely no conception of. They want to introduce this in kindergarten. And this is at the global level. And mind you, the UNESCO, this is the same agency that our top education officials, our Secretary of Education, was saying this is global partner in cradle-to-career education reform. So there is a real agenda to have this perversion and this filth put in schools all over the world. It's taking place much more rapidly in some countries and some societies than others. Unfortunately, America was very quick to fall to this. It'll take them longer in some of the more traditional societies, Islamic societies, Catholic societies, things like that. But people need to go read this document for themselves. They actually cite Planned Parenthood more than 20 times in this document as an expert source for evidence-based research. And if people would look through this, they even have talking points. When parents come in and they're upset that you're sexualizing their 5-year-old, they have the talking points. And hey, we're not trying to take over your role. We just want to be your partner in raising your child. And that's the term they use. They want to be your partner in raising your child. This stuff is sick. This is demented, and parents have an obligation to protect their kids from this.
They learned, I think one of the places they learned how to diffuse opposition is this place up in Bethel, Maine. It's this education society or something. It was started by psychiatrist Kurt Lewin in the 1950s. And it was, who invented the term sensitivity training. And it's a psychiatric agenda. The whole psychiatric thing is a form of mind control anyway, but that's another subject for another day. But the point is that this is, when you say this, the first thing that comes to my mind is, maybe one way to oppose this in the United States at least, and certainly worldwide, is to say that this violates my freedom of religion. My religion does not view sexuality in this way. It views the sexuality as something that's sacred, something that occurs in marriage. Mm-hmm. We have, understandings, and by your teaching this, you are in violation of my religion. But then I stop myself and say, no. That's not going to work because religion has been infiltrated in this country.
That's right.
The Catholic Church has been infiltrated. Most Protestant sects, certainly Judaism is long gone for the most part. They've all been taken over by this agenda. So it's difficult to then make this case and say my religion stands for that, even though it does, because the actual people with the feet on the ground, the high places in our religious system, the idol worshiping top of the mountain in a biblical sense, they're controlling the idol, It's no longer a belief in God, and that they're the ones who might dress themselves in the robe of faith, but they're practicing this psychiatric idea that is completely contrary to the conventional religious understanding of what sexuality is and the role it plays in society, what relationships are. It's been completely co-opted. So given the fact that we're dealing with this movement on so many fronts, whether it be in the public sector, where they're openly promoting it and presenting it and implementing it in the schools, and even in our churches and synagogues, how do we confront this? How do we, counter this? Where can we go?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and I couldn't agree more with you. In fact, a friend of mine, Trevor Loudon, is coming out with a new documentary very soon here about the infiltration of the churches by Marxists, by people who absolutely despise everything that religious people stand for with a specific agenda. And, we make the point in our special report on education here that people have been trying, religious people, Jews and Christians, and they've been trying, Catholics have been trying to stop this in the schools for so many years. If we just elect the right people, if we just, get the right president, if we would just elect a Republican Congress, then we could make all this stop. And unfortunately, the evidence shows that's not true. Just recently, until the most recent election, we had a Republican Congress, a Republican president, a supposedly conservative majority on the Supreme Court. GOP controlled the House and the Senate. And what happened? They ran on a platform of we're going to get rid of Common Core. Well, Common Core is more entrenched today than it was when Obama was president. And this is thanks to the Republicans. So all these efforts at reform, and maybe we can slow this down if we just do enough activism, we argue that this is proven to be completely futile. At best, maybe they held back the tide for a few years, but the battle over the public schools is over. You have one option left at this point to protect your children, and that is to get them out. You can run for school board, you can run for state legislature. There's not a thing you can do about this monstrosity masquerading as an education system. And so we say, parents, you got to get your kids out. But there are alternatives. I think homeschooling is one of the really bright spots, not just on the education front, but on the political and the economic front in this country. I mean, it's just so encouraging to know that there are millions and millions of kids out there across America getting a fantastic education from their parents. They're better socialized, they're better grounded, they can interact well with people of all ages, they're entrepreneurial, and they're smart. Right, so that is so encouraging. For parents who maybe don't think they can do it on their own, there's now a lot of resources out there to help you. One of the guys who worked on this project with us, Dr. Duke Pesta, he is a university professor. He teaches literature at the University of Wisconsin, and he runs the Freedom Project Academy, which is an online K-12 school based on Judeo-Christian values. I happen to teach there. I teach economics there to high school seniors. And that's one option. It's really cost effective. It's only like $2,000 a year for a full program. And if you can't stay home from work and do it, you can work with your church. They can set up an empty room in the church, and you can get a whole bunch of students from the church or the synagogue or whatever to join. And there's other online programs like that too. There's really good private schools out there still. Not all the Catholic schools have gone to Common Core. Only about half of them came to Common Core, and Catholic schools have traditionally offered a very good, high-quality education. So if you're a Catholic, that's a good option for you. So there are options out there. We don't need to despair and just say, we're all doomed. No, we just need to take sensible action to protect our children and then sound the alarm so that other parents know to do the same.
And we need to very carefully but very decisively talk to our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues, fellow parents, and do so in such a way that is very respectful, because most people are not exposed to this stuff. You have to be very careful because, it is very shattering to a lot of people to even begin to be aware of this. And when you introduce new information, there can be a reaction to it. People, they get defensive. So, there's a way to educate by example, and by simply speaking in a very calm and friendly way about these issues that you are concerned about, without coming across as being too, doctrinaire or judgmental, because, it's really, we're countering an almost a hermetically sealed establishment that has the high ground in the culture, in religion, unfortunately now, in politics, and certainly in economics, and that's a lot to take on. So you can do your part in terms of educating yourself. Get Alex's book. Let's take a look at the new issue of New American Magazine, which has this very comprehensive series in it. Duke Pester's program, the Freedom Project, is great, and other programs of homeschooling. Sam Blumenfeld's books are all available. But also, just take a look at your local school, and don't be afraid to say a few things without, you don't want to make too many waves, because you might trigger some people, and I've seen, we could get into stuff that's happened to some parents. I know I had to be careful when my daughter was in school. You're dealing with situations where your child could end up being hurt. So, it's very difficult. It's almost like a form of blackmail.
Yeah, and actually we closed the issue with a word of caution to parents that don't do anything radical, don't say anything radical, because if this catches on and millions more children start leaving the public school system in just a large exodus, they will retaliate. We see what they do in Germany, for example, right? There was just a case decided at the European Court of Human Rights. The German government sent a massive SWAT team to the home of a family of homeschoolers.
Oh my God!
30 social workers and armed police with a battering ram to break down the door to kidnap the children. And there was no accusation of abuse. There was no accusation of harm to the children. There was absolutely no concern about the educational quality the children were receiving. It was only because the children were being homeschooled. And that is the lengths to which governments will go to protect their monopoly on indoctrinating children. And so it's a very delicate situation. And I couldn't agree with you more, Chuck. When you talk to friends or family or pastors or rabbis about this kind of stuff, you really need to be gentle about it. A lot of people have a lot invested into the system. Maybe they have a family member who teaches in the public school. In fact, I know a lot of people who teach in the public schools, and every single one of them homeschools their children, so that ought to tell people something. But it is a very delicate subject. People still have fond memories. I went to school in the 60s, and I still remember it being a lot of fun and things like that. So it's a very delicate issue, and parents need to be careful and recognize that it's a sensitive issue for a lot of people. But in the end, what could be more important than the welfare of your child? And you wouldn't send your child into a burning building because you worry about the physical well-being of your child. And yet, now that you know these things, are you still going to send your child into a building that's metaphorically burning, that's going to be dangerous to their spiritual well-being, their mental well-being, and potentially even their physical well-being, as Sam showed, and as many other prominent people in this field have showed? This quack reading methodology actually physically damages the brain. And in fact, we have brain scans now to prove this. So you're putting your children at risk, and nobody wants to hear that. But it's important for people to recognize that and deal with it in a sensitive way, but still recognize that and sound the alarm.
Absolutely. And, let's, ultimately, I'm optimistic about this, because I know that we're on the right side, and that this unnatural agenda cannot ultimately succeed. The only question is, how many victims is it going to take down in the process of it being rolled back? Alex Newman, I want to thank you for joining me. Let my viewers and listeners know where they can get more information about you and your excellent work.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chuck. It's always a pleasure. And if people want to read more, they can go to thenewamerican.com. You can subscribe to the print magazine there. And then you can find me on Twitter. It's @AlexNewman_JOU, or on Facebook at AlexJNewman86. And again, thenewamerican.com is where the majority of my work appears, so I encourage people to go there and sign up.
Excellent. Alex, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you so much, Chuck.
All right, take care.
You too.
Okay.
All right.